At 58, after 19 years as a widower, I told my daughter I was getting married. Rachel smiled and said, "That's great, Dad. But before the wedding, we need you to sign the lake house and your accounts over to the family trust." Then a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. But let me back up. That Thursday started like every other late October morning in Willow Creek, Ohio. Frost on the windshield, the smell of wood smoke drifting from somewhere down the block, and a dull throb in my lower back from raking leaves the day before. I'd spent the afternoon smoking a brisket in the backyard, the same recipe my wife Carol used to beg me to make every Labor Day. Rachel had loved that brisket since she was 12, always stealing the burnt ends before I could plate them. At 34, married with 2 kids of her own now, she still texted me the week before any visit asking, "Is the smoker going?" I'd picked up a 6-pack of the IPA her husband Dave liked and a bag of dinner rolls from the bakery on Main. Linda had helped me pick out a bottle of wine, though she wasn't joining us that night. I wanted to tell Rachel and Dave about the engagement myself. Just the 3 of us, father to daughter, the way it used to be before everything got complicated. Dave's truck pulled in around 6:15. He left the engine running for a second while Rachel gathered something from the back seat. Through the kitchen window, I watched her check her phone, frowning at whatever was on the screen, before she slipped it into her coat pocket. When they came inside, Dave handed me a bag of golf balls. "Figured you'd need these once you're retired and bored," he said. I laughed. "I'm not retiring for 3 more years. Gives you time to practice," he said. That was Dave's way, always a joke to soften the air before it got heavy. Rachel kissed my cheek and set her tote bag on the kitchen stool, the one Carol used to sit on while she snapped green beans. I noticed, the way I always noticed, then felt foolish for noticing. Carol had been gone 19 years. A stool doesn't belong to anybody forever. Dinner started easy enough. Dave complained about the new roundabout they'd put in on Route 9. Rachel told me our grandson Tyler had made the travel soccer team. I asked if he needed cleats. "Already got him a pair," Rachel said. "Boy's got my speed. Must get that from his mother," I said. Dave laughed politely. The radio was playing low in the other room, some classic rock station Carol used to listen to on Sunday mornings. For a few minutes, I actually believed I'd worried over nothing. Then I set down my fork. "I've got some news." Rachel looked up. "You finally selling that boat you never use?" "No." "You should. It just sits there." I asked Linda to marry me. The kitchen went quiet enough that I heard the refrigerator hum kick on. Rachel glanced at Dave before she looked at me. Dave blinked, then smiled the way people smile when they're buying time. "Well," he said. "Congratulations, Frank." I waited. He reached over and shook my hand, stiff, like we'd just closed on a used car. Rachel asked when it happened. "Saturday. We walked the trail out at Hocking Hills, had dinner in Logan after." She said yes. "That's wonderful," Rachel said, her voice warm, but her hand had gone still around her water glass. Dave leaned back in his chair. "So when's the big day?" "Probably June. Small ceremony at the church, nothing fancy." "Have you 2 talked about a prenup?" There it was. Not congratulations. Not are you happy. Not where will you live. A prenup. "We've discussed it," I said. "That's good," Rachel said, folding her napkin into a tight square. "Second marriages get complicated, especially with the lake house and your 401k and the life insurance." Dave cleared his throat. "What Rachel means is, we just want you protected." "From Linda?" "From complications, Dad." I looked between them. Linda had never once asked me for anything. On our second date, she insisted on splitting the check down to the dollar. She taught 3rd grade for 31 years, drove a Honda with 140,000 miles on it, and still used coupons at Kroger out of habit, not need. "What exactly are you worried about?" I asked. Rachel's face softened in a way that reminded me of how she used to talk to Tyler when he skinned his knee. "Nobody thinks Linda's a bad person, Dad, but people change when there's money on the table." "Which people?" She paused. Dave stepped in. "Dad, you worked 32 years at the plant for what you've got. Mom worked for it too." That landed harder than he probably meant it to. Carol had waited tables at the diner on Elm for 6 years before she got sick. After she passed, I picked up every overtime shift the foreman would give me. I skipped 2 vacations so Rachel could go to state college without loans. I didn't need reminding who built this life. Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out a manila folder, laying it flat on the table like she'd rehearsed the motion. We talked to somebody about setting up a family trust. She said, just as a precaution. I haven't touched it, I promise. Dave opened it and slid the pages toward me. The words swam for a second, not because I couldn't read them, but because some part of me didn't want to. Draft instructions. Trustee, Rachel Whitfield. Property to be transferred, primary residence, lake house at Buckeye Lake, brokerage accounts, certificates of deposit, monthly distributions determined by trustee. I looked up at my daughter. You want to be in charge of my money. That's not how I'd put it. It's written right here in black and white. You'd still have access to everything? Dad. Access? Dave rubbed the back of his neck. Dad, come on, don't make this into something ugly. I'm not the one who brought paperwork to a family dinner. Rachel's voice gentled. You can still marry Linda. Nobody's trying to stop that. Dave nodded. Marry her if that's what makes you happy. But before the wedding, sign the trust over, and you keep control. For the family. I stared at him, this man who'd married my daughter 12 years ago in my backyard, who I'd taught to fillet a base and change a car battery. Now he sat across my table, dividing up what I was allowed to keep. Have you two already worked out how long you think I've got left? Rachel's jaw tightened. That's not fair, Dad. No, because this feels less like planning and more like the two of you carving up my life while I'm still sitting right here breathing. We're thinking about Tyler and Emma's future, Rachel said. From what? Their college fund? Or the chance I might spend my own money before I die? Dave pushed his chair back an inch. You're twisting this. No, I'm finally hearing it clearly. That was when headlights swept across the dining room window. A car I didn't recognize idling at the curb. My stomach dropped before I even understood why. I stood slowly, my knee catching the way it always did in the cold, and looked through the front door glass. A woman in a windbreaker stood on my porch holding a clipboard and a thick envelope. Mr. Frank Doyle? She asked when I opened the door. Yes. I'm here to serve you with documents from the Fairfield County Probate Court. My stomach dropped clean through the floor. I signed where she pointed and carried the envelope back to the kitchen. Rachel had gone pale. Dave's hands were flat on the table like he needed them to hold something down. I opened the first page. Verified petition for appointment of guardian of the person and estate of an alleged incapacitated adult. My name printed beneath the caption. Then Rachel's. I checked the filing date, 8 days earlier. You filed this over a week ago, I said. Rachel's voice cracked. Dad, we were hoping you'd just agree. So this folder wasn't a conversation. It was a formality. Your last shot at getting me to sign without a fight. I looked at the daughter I'd raised alone after her mother died. Driven to swim practice at 5 in the morning, sat up through 2 broken engagements before Dave. You filed this before I even told you I was engaged. Rachel stared at the table. We knew you wouldn't listen otherwise. That was the moment I understood. They hadn't come to save me from Linda. They'd come to save my money from me. Dave stood the second the process server's car pulled off my street. Dad, just read everything before you panic. Panic? I know how this looks. No, I said quietly. I don't think you do. Rachel reached for the folder again like it might explain itself better a second time. This petition doesn't mean we think you're incapable. It's just asking the court to review the situation. You're asking a judge to decide if I'm fit to run my own life. We're asking for protection. For who? Neither of them answered. The brisket sat untouched between us, the smoke smell now just making my stomach turn. Dave finally said, We didn't want it to come to this. Then why file it 8 days before sitting at my table pretending we were still a family having dinner? His shoulders dropped. We wanted to give you one last chance. One last chance to do what? To make the right decision. I let out a short laugh that had no humor in it. You mean, your decision? Rachel looked genuinely stricken. Dad, please don't think we're your enemies. My enemies probably would have waited until after dessert. Nobody spoke for a long moment. The radio in the other room kept playing, some song about summer that felt like a cruel joke given the frost outside. Finally, Dave grabbed his keys. We'll let the lawyers sort it out. Then they left, and I watched their taillights disappear down Maple Street without either of them looking back. I didn't sleep that night. The house felt too loud, the furnace clicking on and off, a branch scraping the bedroom window every time the wind kicked up. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up pretending. I made a pot of coffee that tasted like punishment and sat at the kitchen table reading every page. The language was calm and clinical in a way that felt worse than if they'd just been angry. It never called me a bad father. It described me as a man whose judgment had become questionable. One paragraph claimed I'd left the stove on unattended after Tyler's soccer game. True, technically, except I'd stepped out to the mailbox for 4 minutes and come back to a pot of simmering chili, not a fire. Another section mentioned I'd missed a cardiology follow-up. True, because I'd written the appointment down for the wrong Tuesday. There was a line about a ring I'd bought Linda for our engagement. $2,400. The petition called it an unusually extravagant purchase inconsistent with Mr. Doyle's established spending patterns. I nearly laughed out loud. I'd spent more than that fixing Dave's transmission 4 years back, and nobody had questioned my judgment then. The page that finally stopped me cold involved my doctor. I'd mentioned during my annual physical that I'd been forgetting little things, misplacing my readers, losing track of what day it was some mornings. Doctor, Halloran had adjusted my blood pressure medication and told me the fog would clear in a few weeks. No memory diagnosis, no dementia screening result, no cognitive decline noted anywhere in my chart. Yet here it sat, dressed up to sound like the opening chapter of Losing My Mind. I sat back. The coffee had gone cold in my hands. I understood something then that had never occurred to me in 58 years. You don't have to be helpless to feel powerless. Sometimes all it takes is watching someone describe you on paper as though they've already decided who you are. At 8 the next morning, I called Gerald Pruitt. I'd known Gerald almost 25 years, since he'd handled Carol's estate and helped me refinance the house after the funeral costs nearly buried me. He picked up on the second ring. "Morning, Frank. I need help, Gerald." His voice changed instantly. "What happened?" "Rachel filed for guardianship over me." "Silence on the line then. Come to my office." Gerald's office sat above the hardware store on Main. Same oak desk, same dish of butterscotch candies that had probably been there since the Bush administration. He read the whole petition without saying a word, then set down his glasses. "They're asking for guardianship of your person and your estate both." "What does that actually mean?" "It means they want a judge to decide whether you're capable of making your own decisions." "Frank, can they even do this?" "They can ask. Asking isn't winning." That helped, a little. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "The court doesn't expect a 58-year-old man to remember every appointment or never misplace his keys." "Then why does this scare me so bad?" "Because it should. A guardianship petition is serious." "Serious doesn't mean accurate." He tapped the page. "The question isn't whether you've ever forgotten something. The question is whether you understand your property, your finances, your relationships, and the weight of your own decisions." I let out a breath. "I do. I know you do," Gerald said. "Now we have to prove it." Before I left, he gave me 3 rules. First, don't move a dime around out of spite. Wasn't planning to. Good. Second, no angry texts, no angry emails. I smiled without much heart in it. Already deleted 2 drafts. Wise man. Third, don't argue with Rachel. That might be the hardest one. Anything you say to her can end up as an exhibit. Linda came by that evening with a pan of her chicken and rice casserole. "Figured you hadn't eaten anything real," she said. She was right. I'd had toast at 4 o'clock and called it dinner. We sat on my back porch bundled in flannel while the sun dropped behind the sycamores. I handed her the petition. She read every line, and when she reached the part suggesting she was manipulating me financially, her eyes filled. "I'm so sorry, Frank. You didn't write it. I'm the reason they're doing it." "No. Yes," she said, looking down at the pages. "If we weren't getting married, none of this happens." I reached for her hand. She pulled it back gently. "Maybe we should wait." "For how long?" "I don't know. A year, maybe." "And if they object again in a year?" She didn't answer. 2 years then. 5? Her eyes went glassy. "I don't want to be the reason you lose your daughter." Those words hit harder than anything in that petition, because she meant every one of them. I walked to the porch railing. Across the yard stood the maple Carol and I had planted the year Rachel started kindergarten. For a second, I could almost hear Carol laughing. Not really, just memory doing what memory does when a person's lonely. Before she died, we talked about everything. The bills, Rachel, even the chance that someday I might love somebody else. She'd squeezed my hand near the end and made me promise not to spend the rest of my life sitting alone in this house because of her. I'd broken that promise for 19 years. I turned back to Linda. None of this is your fault. She studied me. Are you sure? No, I said, and almost smiled. It's mine. I told her I'd spent 19 years believing that every time Rachel struggled, it was my job to fix it. Maybe I forgot that raising a person isn't the same as rescuing them forever. Linda came and took my hand again, and this time she didn't let go. Neither of us said anything for a while. Some nights silence tells the truth better than any speech could. At nearly 9 that night, my phone rang. Gerald. They've requested an emergency hearing. So soon? They're asking for temporary control over some of your finances until the court reviews everything. I closed my eyes. What do I do? You keep living exactly like you've been living, and Frank, from this point on, assume every word out of your mouth could get repeated in a courtroom. After we hung up, I stood alone on the porch a long time, the house glowing softly behind me in the dark yard. For the first time since Carol died, I realized I wasn't scared of getting older. I was scared that the people I loved most had already decided I didn't get a say in how I spent whatever years I had left. The following Monday, I sat in a small medical office in Lancaster, answering questions I never thought I'd have to answer out loud. What year is it? Who's the governor of Ohio? I answered without missing a beat. Can you list your current medications? I named them off, one at a time. Then came questions that felt less like medicine and more like an audition for adulthood. If someone offered to buy your house tomorrow for half what it's worth, what would you do? Tell them to leave. She smiled. What would happen if you got married without ever discussing property? I'd spend a few uncomfortable evenings with my lawyer. Another smile. By the time it wrapped up, nearly 2 hours had passed. She shook my hand and thanked me for my patience. I climbed into my truck and sat there 5 minutes before I could make myself turn the key. I wasn't relieved. I was wrung out. It wasn't the questions. It was realizing how easily ordinary moments, a stove left simmering, a missed appointment, an expensive ring, could get stitched together into a story about a man losing his mind. 3 days later, I sat across from Gerald again, his conference table covered in banker's boxes. Let's build your story instead, he said, sliding a legal pad my way. We're going to list every dollar you ever gave Rachel. All of it? That'll take all day. I cleared my afternoon. We started easy. The down payment on her first house. The loan when Dave's landscaping business nearly folded. 6 months of their mortgage during that stretch. Tyler's preschool tuition. The hospital bill when Emma was born early. The list kept growing. One memory pulling the next behind it. Around noon, Gerald leaned back. You know what's interesting, Frank? You never once asked for anything back. I was her father. Somewhere along the way, Gerald said, she stopped being your daughter in this and started acting like your client. That sentence stuck with me all afternoon, mostly because it wasn't wrong. By evening, we'd finished. Gerald totaled the column. $412,600. I stared at the number a long time. Didn't think it was that much. Most parents don't. I laughed without much joy in it. Funny thing is, I don't regret $1 of it. What I regret is teaching her that help would always show up. Gerald closed the folder. That difference matters. Linda arrived just before 5 with a folder of her own. This one's mine, she said, laying it on the table. Retirement statements, the deed to her condo, a draft prenuptial agreement. Gerald went through it carefully. Frank, did you know Linda owns her place outright? No. Paid it off 6 years ago, Linda said. Your pension? 31 years with the district, she said, almost shy about it. Gerald nodded. This changes the picture. Linda shook her head. I don't want it to change anything. I don't want your money, Frank. I never did. I know. I wanted somebody to complain about a bad hip with. That made me laugh, the first real laugh in a week. And somebody who still watches black and white movies. I like black and white movies. And somebody who doesn't think eating supper at 5 o'clock is strange. It isn't strange. The following Friday, Rachel called. Hi, Dad. Tired, I said. Dave and I were wondering if you'd meet with us. Why? So we can work something out. I almost said no. Then I remembered Gerald's advice. Where? Our attorney's office. I agreed to go. The office sat in a new building outside Pickerington. Glass walls, coffee that smelled like it cost too much. Rachel greeted me like nothing had happened. Dave wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Their attorney opened with, We believe there's still an opportunity to avoid unnecessary litigation. I nodded. Go on. He slid over a revised proposal. Rachel said hopefully, if you set up the trust now, Dave can serve as trustee. What changes? You'd stay in your house for now. For now. Yes. You'd receive monthly distributions for living, expenses. Who decides the amount? Dave answered. We would, based on your spending history. He slid a spreadsheet across groceries, utilities, gas, church offering, dining out. Somebody had priced out how much money I should be allowed to spend a month. I stared at it. You've budgeted my life, Rachel said softly. We're just trying to simplify things. For who? Everyone. I kept reading. One line near the bottom caught my eye. Future housing considerations. Estimated market value, Willow Creek residence. I looked up. You've already had somebody price my house, Rachel answered too fast. No. I tapped the page. Then why is there a number here? That was just preliminary. Preliminary for what? In case you ever wanted something smaller. I've never once said I wanted something smaller. Dave jumped in. We're just thinking ahead. I closed the folder slowly. You've been thinking ahead a lot. The meeting ended politely. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody stormed off. But walking to the parking lot, Gerald caught up beside me. Well, what do you think? He smiled without any real humor in it. I think Rachel just made a mistake. What mistake? She admitted they'd already started planning your life after the court took it away from you. You think that matters? I think judges notice timing. The next morning, Gerald called before 8. Amended petition just came in. Now what? They're asking the court to temporarily restrict your major transactions. Claim you might move assets before the wedding. I laughed once, no humor in it at all. Because I finally understood. This was never about whether I could manage my own money. It was about making sure I couldn't manage it without their permission. The hearing landed on a Thursday morning at the Fairfield County Courthouse. I got there 45 minutes early. Same as I'd shown up to that plant floor for 32 years. If you weren't 15 minutes early, you were already late in my book. Gerald was already parked on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, legal pad on his knee. Sleep at all? A little. That's more than most people manage before one of these. He handed me a paper cup of coffee that tasted like tar. It's terrible. It is, but it's hot. For a second, we both smiled, and it helped, not because either joke landed, but because it reminded me I was still allowed to feel like a regular person. Linda arrived a few minutes later in a navy dress and gray coat, nothing flashy, and sat beside me, slipping her cold hand into mine. Across the hall, Rachel and Dave walked in with their attorney. Rachel gave me a small, formal nod, the kind you give a coworker, not your father. Inside, the courtroom was small. A handful of wooden benches, the Ohio state flag, a bench worn smooth by decades of use. Judge Patricia Alvarez entered right on time. After a few routine matters, our case got called. Rachel's attorney spoke first, calm, respectful, careful to note that nobody was calling me a bad man, only that the petition existed to protect me during a period of significant life transition. He listed the stove, the missed appointment, the ring, the medication change, each one harmless alone, presented together like a pattern. Listening to a stranger summarize your entire life is a strange thing, especially when every ordinary mistake gets treated like evidence. Then Gerald stood. He didn't pace, didn't raise his voice. He walked to the podium and said simply, Your Honor, growing older doesn't make a man incapable. It makes him older. He submitted the independent cognitive evaluation. The judge read it quietly for several minutes, then looked up. Mr. Doyle, please come forward. I took the stand and was sworn in. She asked the first question herself. What are your current sources of income? I explained my pension, my 401k, Social Security, and the part-time consulting I still did for my old plant. Who manages those funds? I do. Have you asked Linda Reyes to manage any of your finances? No. Has she ever asked to? Never. Rachel's attorney rose. Mr. Doyle, did you purchase a ring for Miss Reyes worth roughly $2,400? I did. Why? Because I love her. A few people in the gallery smiled softly at that. Would you agree that's more than you've spent on past gifts? Yes. Why the change? I shrugged. Because I'm 58 and I finally met somebody worth celebrating. The room went quiet. He changed direction. You've forgotten appointments before. Yes. Left a stove unattended. Briefly, yes. So you admit memory issues exist? No, I said, looking straight at him. I admit I'm getting older. If forgetting one Tuesday means I lose the right to run my own life, half the men at my church should be sitting up here beside me. A few quiet laughs rippled through the benches. Even the judge's mouth twitched. Gerald began his questions. Mr. Doyle, why did you agree to a prenuptial agreement? Because Linda suggested it. Why? So my property stays mine and hers stays hers. Did she ask for a claim on your house? No. Any retirement account? No. Gerald held up the signed draft. This agreement waives any claim either party has to the other's premarital property. The judge examined it herself. Rachel's attorney objected that it wasn't finalized. Gerald nodded. Correct, Your Honor. Offered only to show Mr. Doyle's intent and Miss Reyes's lack of financial motive. The judge allowed it. Then came the part I dreaded. Gerald set a thick binder on the evidence table. The court has heard repeated suggestion that Mr. Doyle is vulnerable to exploitation. I'd like to introduce a different financial relationship into evidence. He pulled up a spreadsheet on the courtroom monitor, one line at a time. Down payment assistance, business loan, mortgage assistance, medical bills, tuition. The total appeared at the bottom, $412,600. Gerald turned to Rachel. Did your father give these funds voluntarily? Yes, Rachel said quietly. Did you promise repayment on several of them? Yes. Did you repay most of it? She swallowed. No. Gerald nodded once. No further questions. The judge wasn't interested in shaming Rachel. She simply asked, Mrs. Whitfield, when did you first ask your father to transfer his property into a trust under your control? Rachel hesitated. A few days before the dinner. And when was this petition filed? She looked at her attorney. The judge repeated the question. 8 days before the dinner, Rachel finally said. The room went very still. So before you ever spoke to your father about it, the judge said, you had already filed with this court to have him declared incompetent. Yes. Has any physician diagnosed him with dementia? No. Alzheimer's? No. Any condition preventing him from understanding his own finances? No. The judge looked down at the petition. Has Mr. Doyle failed to pay his taxes? No. Lost money to a scam? No. Failed to understand the nature of his own property? No. She looked directly at Rachel. Then what exactly changed? Rachel opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Gerald called one last witness, a local real estate agent, who testified that Dave had contacted her weeks earlier asking for an estimated value on my house. Dave explained it was only preliminary planning. The judge accepted that without much comment, then asked one simple question. Mr. Whitfield, had your father-in-law ever told you he wanted to sell that house? Dave lowered his eyes. No. Then why start pricing it before he'd made that decision? Dave had nothing. The silence answered for him. The judge recessed for 20 minutes. Longest 20 minutes of my life. When she came back, she spoke plainly. The court finds insufficient evidence that Mr. Frank Doyle lacks capacity to manage his personal or financial affairs. The request for temporary guardianship is denied. The petition is dismissed. I closed my eyes, not from winning, but because for the first time in weeks, I could actually breathe. Outside, Rachel caught up to me before the elevator. Dad. I turned. We were scared, she said. I looked at her a long moment. You were scared I might spend my own money. Her shoulders dropped. You never stopped to think that treating me like I couldn't be trusted with my own life meant you were losing your father. She tried to speak again. I raised my hand gently. Not today. Linda slipped her arm through mine, and together we walked out into November air that felt colder than when we'd gone in, though somehow I felt lighter than I had in a month. We postponed the wedding 6 weeks, not because either of us had changed our minds, but because I needed the time to remember my life still belonged to me. For a while, every ringing phone made my stomach clench. Every trip to the mailbox felt like walking toward bad news. Linda never pushed. Some evenings she'd bring over her dog Biscuit, Other nights we just walked the trail at Black Hand Gorge without saying much. The silence was different now. Earned. We married on a cold Saturday afternoon in a small church outside Lancaster. 30 guests, roast chicken and green beans in the fellowship hall, a playlist of old country songs through the church speakers. Halfway through dinner, Linda leaned close. You know what's funny? This is exactly the wedding I hoped for. Nobody in that room cared about lake houses or 401 Keys. For a few hours, we were just two people starting a new chapter, and that was enough. Rachel wasn't there. I thought about her more than once that day, reached for my phone more than once, put it back each time. Love doesn't disappear because somebody hurts you. Forgiveness just doesn't run on anybody's schedule but its own. The following week, I sat with Gerald one last time to finish my estate plan, this time without a trace of anger in me. What do you want it to accomplish? He asked. Not who gets what it should do. I thought a long while. I want Linda taken care of if I go first. I want Tyler and Emma to have real chances. But I don't want money turning into another excuse for somebody to stop taking responsibility for their own life. Gerald nodded, made his notes. I don't want Rachel managing anything of mine, I said. That can be arranged. Linda keeps the right to stay in the house as long as she wants. After that, sell it. Put the money in trust for the grandkids, with conditions, school, medical needs, a first home someday. But nobody, including Rachel, gets to treat it like a personal ATM. Gerald smiled. I like that. So do I. About 6 weeks later, Rachel called. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Dad, my transmission's gone. For 19 years, I knew exactly what came next. I'd ask how much. She'd apologize. I'd write the check without blinking. Instead, I asked, you get an estimate? About $2,800. That's rough. Silence. Can you loan me the money? I closed my eyes. Every old instinct in me wanted to fix it on the spot. Instead, I took a slow breath. I can't do that. Nothing on the other end. I'll drive you to work while it's in the shop if you need me to. I'll help you compare quotes. But I'm not paying for it. A long pause then. Quiet. I understand. Nearly 4 months after the hearing, I was out back replacing a rotted fence post when a truck I recognized pulled into the driveway. Rachel climbed out carrying a toolbox I hadn't asked her to bring. You still use that old post hole digger? She asked. Still works. So does this one, she said, holding up her own. Neither of us moved for a second. Finally, she said, figured you could use an extra pair of hands. We spent 3 hours resetting fence posts, mostly quiet, talking about nothing much, the weather, Tyler's soccer season, everything that mattered without saying so. When we finished, she looked at the new line of posts. Looks good. Yeah, I said. She started loading her tools, then stopped. Dad, I've been seeing somebody. A counselor. I looked at her. She asked me something last week. Why I kept calling your money our future. She swallowed hard. I didn't know how to answer her. I waited. She finally said something I don't think I'll ever forget. She said an inheritance is a gift, not a retirement plan. Neither of us said anything for a while. I think I convinced myself I was protecting Mom's legacy, Rachel said. I shook my head gently. Your mother never once called it her money. She always said ours. Rachel frowned. And after she was gone, I said, it just became the life I kept building. Her eyes filled. I'm sorry, Dad. No excuses this time. No blaming Dave, no blaming fear. Just those 2 words, and I believe she meant them. Did that undo what happened? No. Trust doesn't grow back overnight for anybody. But for the first time in months, I saw my daughter standing in that yard instead of the woman who'd sat across from me at that dinner table. You hungry? I asked. She looked surprised. I've got leftover brisket. A slow smile crossed her face. I haven't had your brisket in months. I know. We didn't talk about the courthouse or the trust or the money that afternoon. Some conversations deserve more than one sitting. Some wounds heal one quiet Saturday at a time. Looking back now, I don't think the real lesson here was about money at all. It was about boundaries. For years, I believed loving my daughter meant rescuing her from every hard thing life threw at her. What I finally learned at 58 is that real love sometimes means stepping back, telling the truth plainly, and letting another grown adult carry the weight of their own choices. Linda says our marriage didn't really begin on our wedding day. She says it began the afternoon I stopped apologizing for wanting a life of my own. If you've ever had to draw a line with somebody you love more than anything, I hope you know you're not the only one. Sometimes protecting your own peace is the kindest thing you can do for everybody standing around you, even on the days it doesn't feel that way at all.